Welcome, the anointed ones. The rarest souls are never lost. They are fumbled by those who mistook divine treasure for spare change. Let that settle in for a second. Because what we're about to expose isn't just a mistake. It's a cosmic miscalculation that someone will regret for the rest of their natural life. You see, psychological studies show that we don't fear losing people. We fear losing access to the version of ourselves that only existed in their presence. And if you were that person, if you were the soul that made them feel safe, seen, and supernatural, then trust me, they didn't just lose a connection. They lost the one person who brought their higher self out of hiding. And what's wild is this. They thought they were discarding a nobody, but instead they fumbled a once-in-a-lifetime presence. One who carried generational healing in their voice, sacred wisdom in their silence, and spiritual armor disguised as gentleness. Now, they're spiraling, stuttering, and spiritual Googling how to get the chosen one back like it's a customer service hotline. Plot twist, it's disconnected. So buckle up, because in this video, we're pulling back the curtain on what really went down. Why they fumbled you, what made you too rare for their reach, and why their biggest mistake wasn't losing you. It was never recognizing what you were in the first place. Let's talk about it. Number 1. They weren't intimidated by your flaws. They were terrified by your untapped power. They didn't walk away because you were too emotional, too quiet, too intense, or too complicated. That's the story they told themselves, and maybe even the one they told others. But the truth is far deeper and far more uncomfortable. They didn't leave because you were flawed. They left because they saw the power inside of you and knew they couldn't handle what it was about to become. You weren't out of control. You were just out of their control. People are usually fine with potential as long as it's underdeveloped and dependent. But once your light starts to stretch past the limits they tried to put on you, it exposes what they're not. Your clarity forces them to confront their confusion. Your evolution calls out their stagnation, and your confidence starts to burn holes in their insecurity, so they bail, and to protect their ego, they blame you. You were in the middle of blooming, and they mistook your transitions for chaos. They saw you going through growing pains and thought it was instability. But growth is never graceful. Transformation isn't always pretty. You weren't falling apart. You were shedding layers they were never meant to see. And instead of standing beside you through that divine process, they panicked and ran because deep down, they knew what you were becoming, and they realized they would never be able to keep up. It was never about your weakness. It was about your rising strength. It was about the way your presence started shifting rooms, the way your words started cutting through lies, the way your silence began to hold more weight than their entire personality. That terrified them. Because control is a drug, and you were their last high. They didn't reject you. They retreated from the storm your greatness was about to unleash. They didn't fumble you because you lacked something. They fumbled you because you were becoming someone they could no longer manipulate, contain, or comprehend. Number 2, they confused your emotional honesty with emotional instability because they've never met anyone that real. They called you unstable because you felt things deeply, because you spoke from the heart instead of hiding behind filters, because when something hurt, you said it. When something felt off, you brought it up. You weren't dramatic, you were emotionally fluent. But to people who are used to suppressing their feelings or performing fake calm to survive, your honesty felt like chaos. They weren't used to someone who actually meant what they said. That scared them. They didn't know how to handle someone who cried without shame, laughed without holding back, and questioned things that didn't make sense. You weren't unpredictable. You were just real in a world that rewards people for being numb and disconnected. And that made them nervous. You weren't out here exploding. You were expressing. But they were so used to people bottling things up or playing it cool that when you brought your full emotional self into the room, they mistook your depth for danger. They weren't uncomfortable because you were broken. They were uncomfortable because you refused to fake it. They didn't know how to deal with someone who actually listens to their inner voice, calls things out, and refuses to shrink to make others feel better. That level of presence is a mirror, and most people aren't ready to see themselves in one. So they slapped a label on you. Too much, overly sensitive, emotional. Not because it was true, but because it helped them feel safe from what you reflected back to them. You showed them what it looks like to live without the mask. You showed them what it means to feel fully. And not everyone wants that level of intensity, not because it's wrong, but because it requires them to level up too. They didn't fumble a mess. They fumbled someone with the courage to show up raw, honest, and alive. You were the kind of real they only pretend to be. Number 3, they thought you needed them. You were just patient enough to see if they'd grow. They thought you were hanging on because you had no better option. They believed you were dependent on them, emotionally, mentally, maybe even financially. But what they never realized was that you were simply giving them time. Time to rise, time to evolve, time to step into a version of themselves that could match where you were heading. You weren't stuck, you were watching, observing, hoping they'd grow into someone you wouldn't have to leave behind. That's what hurt the most. Not the rejection, not the betrayal, not the disrespect, but the realization that they had the chance to grow with you, and they wasted it. You gave them access to your process. You didn't just offer love. You offered alignment, vision, purpose, and spiritual elevation. But they were too busy measuring you by appearances and ego-driven standards to recognize the opportunity right in front of them. They mistook your loyalty for lack of options, not realizing it was coming from self-awareness, not desperation. You had choices. You had people watching you. But you weren't chasing flashes. You were investing in what you thought could become something real. They had no idea you were operating from grace, not need. They confused your presence with permission, not understanding that your energy had an expiration date. The truth is, you could have walked away long before they ever tried to make you feel replaceable. But you didn't. You gave space. You gave patience. You gave chance after chance for them to wake up to their own potential. And they squandered it. They fumbled someone who wasn't waiting because they were weak, but because they were rooted in purpose and not in performance. Now that you've finally pulled your energy back, they're starting to get it. Too late. They're realizing you weren't orbiting them, you were measuring them. And the verdict is in. They couldn't meet the standard. They lost someone who was never chasing them, just checking if they could be chosen back. Number 4. They mistook your isolation for loneliness, not realizing you were being refined, not rejected. They thought your quiet seasons meant you were losing. They saw you alone and assumed you had no one. They noticed you withdrawing, cutting people off, staying low, and they laughed. They whispered that you were falling off, that you had no support, that you were becoming irrelevant. But they were watching through a lens clouded by ego and ignorance. What they didn't understand is that isolation, for someone like you, isn't a breakdown. It's a reset. It's sacred ground. It's where the noise dies and the soul gets loud. They didn't know you were pulling back so you could reconnect with your purpose without interference. That you were intentionally creating space, not because you were empty, but because you were about to be filled. They thought the silence meant defeat, but silence was your sanctuary. They thought nobody wanted you around, when in reality you were being hidden for protection, elevation, and preparation. You weren't being rejected by people, you were being redirected by God. They couldn't see the internal work. They didn't notice the way your mindset was shifting. They couldn't feel the weight you were shedding. They weren't aware that every day in that solitude your vision got clearer, your boundaries got sharper, and your peace became non-negotiable. You weren't avoiding the world. You were healing from it. You weren't running from people. You were running toward purpose. So when they fumbled you, they didn't just walk away from someone who was lonely. They walked away from someone who had just been in a spiritual lab, getting every piece of their identity redefined and reinforced. They left during the silence, and they'll regret it once the noise of your impact starts shaking rooms they can't even enter anymore. They mistook your quiet as a void. What they didn't know is that you were sitting in the eye of your own storm, becoming the version of yourself that nobody will ever mishandle again. Number 5. They took inventory of your life without understanding the value of your soul. They looked at what you didn't have and thought they had you figured out. No flashy car, no degree from some big-name school, Not a million followers or a blue check. In their mind, you were just another regular. Nothing impressive, nothing special. And that's where they messed up, because they used man-made metrics to measure something that was divinely engineered. They thought value was only visible. They never stopped to ask what you carried that couldn't be seen. They never questioned how you managed to stay standing after all you went through, how you kept showing up with love, clarity, and wisdom, even while walking through hell. They saw an average life, but didn't realize they were standing in front of someone who carried ancient resilience, rare intuition, and unshakable favor, things no resume can ever list. You weren't just working a job or chasing a dream. You were moving with generations of pain, strength, and breakthrough on your back. You carried voices that were silenced before you, and light meant to guide those who come after you. That's not something you wear, that's something you are. But they couldn't see it because they were trained to only honor what's loud, branded, and profitable. They never asked how you made people feel safer just by being in the room, or how your words could untangle trauma like you were speaking directly to the soul. They missed the value of your presence because they couldn't assign it a price. So they called you basic, background, unimportant. But in doing that, they rejected an asset their life may never recover from losing. They fumbled a walking portal, someone who alters realities, unlocks clarity, and brings light into dark spaces without even trying. They took inventory of your car, your clothes, your titles, but never your energy. Never your essence. They saw surface and missed substance. They had divine treasure in their grasp and mistook it for dust. And now, that loss is going to haunt them. Number 6. They laughed at you while you were in survival mode, but never asked how you survived. They thought your hard times made you weak. They looked at your worn-out shoes, your tired eyes, your quiet demeanor, and saw someone they could laugh at, gossip about, overlook. They didn't ask what it cost you just to make it through the day. They didn't care to understand the weight you were carrying or the sacrifices you were making just to survive. To them, your struggle was entertainment, a joke, something to whisper about and use to boost their own fragile egos. But while they were laughing, you were learning. While they were mocking your losses, you were mastering the art of getting back up without applause. What they didn't see was that every setback taught you how to move in silence, how to read energy, how to feel your way through the dark without flinching. You weren't just surviving, you were being sharpened, calibrated, conditioned by divine fire to become someone who can't be broken by what used to destroy you. They thought you were falling behind, but you were actually being stripped of illusions. They thought you had nothing going on, but you were being taught by life itself, the kind of education no textbook can provide. You learned how to spot lies by how they vibrate, how to detect fake love from the silence it leaves behind, how to sense danger in smiles and peace in your own presence. What they laughed at was your training ground. And now that you're rising, they're starting to panic, because the version of you that struggled was never the final product. That was just the blueprint. The survivor version of you didn't come to impress. It came to transform, to break generational curses, to build without needing permission, to protect what matters and never look back. They fumbled someone who didn't seek revenge, because they became too powerful to waste time proving anything. You don't want payback. You are the consequence. And now, they're realizing the person they ridiculed could see through them the entire time. Number 7. They fumbled the one person who would have kept their secrets safe because they were addicted to betrayal. They had someone who would have stood by them through the ugliest parts of their story, and they still chose to gamble it. You were the one person who saw the mess behind their image and didn't flinch. You saw the fear behind their anger, the insecurity behind their arrogance, the wounds behind their manipulation. And still, you stayed. You weren't there to expose them. You were there to help them face themselves. You weren't interested in using their secrets. You were trying to help them heal from them. But they couldn't trust what they didn't understand. They were so used to betrayal games and shallow loyalty that your depth felt suspicious. Your consistency felt foreign. They confused your protection for weakness and your silence for submission. They were used to people who only loved them when they were performing. But you loved them in their stillness, in their flaws, in their mess. And that scared them more than hate ever could. Instead of rising to meet that kind of rare loyalty, they let ego take the wheel. They let temptation win. They let chaos feel like home. You were offering covenant, something sacred, binding, unshakable. But they chose betrayal because that's what they've always known. They thought sabotaging something real would give them control. But all it did was expose how empty they truly are when love walks away. And now, they have no more safe space. The mask is cracking, the lies are catching up, and the one person who would have never used their truth against them is gone. You were their vault, the place where they could have put everything they were ashamed of and trusted it would never be thrown back in their face. But they broke that trust for short-term validation, for a temporary ego boost, for drama they thought they could manage. They didn't just lose someone who loved them, they lost someone who covered them, spiritually, emotionally, energetically, and now they're left exposed, with no one left who sees them and still stays. That wasn't just a relationship they fumbled, that was their last chance at redemption. Number 8. They projected their guilt onto you, then were shocked when you healed without them. They needed you to stay hurt, not because they cared about you, but because your pain made them feel less guilty about what they did. As long as you were bitter, angry, shattered, they could tell themselves you were just too sensitive, too emotional, or still not over it. That narrative helped them sleep at night. It let them pretend they weren't the villain, that you were just dramatic, unstable, or impossible to please. So when you stopped crying and started glowing, it confused them. When you didn't seek revenge, didn't post cryptic messages, didn't try to prove a point, they didn't know how to process it. Your peace became louder than any argument you could have made. They were waiting for a breakdown, and instead, you had a breakthrough. They thought your silence was defeat, but it was healing. You weren't plotting revenge. You were rebuilding your self-worth. You weren't trying to ruin their name. You were reclaiming your power. And that's what shook them, because deep down, they knew they gave you every reason to become bitter, and you still chose better. You chose growth. You chose alignment. You chose to become someone even their lies couldn't touch. They didn't expect you to rise without needing to take them down. They thought their absence would paralyze you, that their betrayal would break you. But all it did was strip away your illusions and remind you of who you've been all along. You realized you never needed their closure, validation, or apology. You were the closure. They fumbled someone rare, someone who knew what they did, how they lied, how they twisted things, and still chose not to retaliate. You didn't want payback. You wanted peace. And now they're haunted by the fact that you healed on your own, became whole without their help, and never looked back. They lost the one person who could have buried them, but chose to forgive instead. That's a level of strength they'll never understand, and a loss they'll never recover from. Number 9. They were never prepared for the consequences of mishandling a soul with cosmic authority. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They treated you like an ordinary person, someone they could control, break, or discard without consequence. But they forgot one critical thing. You carry a cosmic authority that doesn't ask for permission to act. You're not just a soul wandering aimlessly. You're a force that moves with divine purpose. And that purpose is woven into the very fabric of reality itself. When they tried to humiliate you, reality flipped the script. What was meant to embarrass you became the spotlight that exposed their true colors. Their lies didn't bury you, they dug their own graves. Their attempts to manipulate and control didn't bend your will, they unraveled their plans. You didn't have to lift a finger to retaliate because the universe is a master of balance and it responds to every energy you put out. They thought they were playing chess while you were playing checkers. But what they didn't see was that your moves were already written in a cosmic playbook they could never access. Every underestimation, every slight, every betrayal, they unknowingly activated forces beyond their comprehension. Forces that don't forget, don't forgive easily, and don't miss a single detail. The moment they fumbled you, they set off a chain reaction. Doors began to close for them, masks started to slip, and alliances they thought were secure began to crumble. What they tried to use against you, came back like a boomerang, stronger and more precise. You don't have to prove your power. You don't have to shout or seek revenge. Your strength lies in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're protected by something greater than their schemes. And that protection isn't passive. It's active, fierce, and relentless. They underestimated the consequences of mishandling someone with your kind of divine backing. They thought it was just a game, but for you, it's a cosmic reckoning. And right now, the scales are tipping, and it's their downfall that's inevitable. Number 10. They thought they had time. But you were their last grace period. They acted like there would always be another chance, another tomorrow to fix what they broke. They treated your presence like a safety net that would never snap, a grace period that could stretch endlessly. But you weren't just some backup plan or a fleeting consolation prize. You were the final pause, the last pause before everything spiraled out of control. In every relationship, every connection, there's an invisible deadline where mercy ends and consequences begin. You were that deadline for them. You were the living proof that redemption doesn't come free or easy. They had time, but they wasted it, taking you for granted like a forgotten blessing. They assumed your forgiveness was unconditional, your patience infinite, and your endurance bottomless. You weren't just standing there quietly. You were holding space for them to wake up, to choose better, to break the cycles of their past. You were the calm eye of the storm they couldn't see coming. But they treated you like a mistake, a burden, an inconvenience. And that's when they fumbled the ultimate chance at freedom. Now the cycles they should have escaped are closing in like shadows. The lessons you offered, the boundaries you set, the chances you gave, they weren't just random acts of kindness. They were lifelines, and they chose to let go. They didn't just lose you. They lost the very thing that could have rewritten their story, the chance to stop repeating pain, to break toxic patterns, to step into a new reality. They thought they had time to change, to heal, to grow, but the clock ran out and you were the final warning light they ignored. Their failure to honor you isn't just a personal loss, it's a cosmic consequence. Because once the last grace period ends, what comes next is unavoidable. They forfeited their exit, and now they're trapped in the cycles they could have escaped, all because they fumbled the one person who was holding the key. Number 11. They treated you like a backup plan, not realizing you were the blueprint. They acted like you were just an option, a placeholder, until something better came along. They treated you like a backup plan, someone to fill the gaps when nothing else was available, never stopping to see that you were the blueprint itself. They wanted flashy distractions, quick fixes, and surface-level excitement. They chased after things that glittered but had no depth, believing that more noise meant more value. But you weren't made to be swapped out or sidelined. You were the original design, carefully constructed, layered with purpose, and built to last through storms they didn't even see coming. You had integrity embedded in your core, a foundation they mistook for stubbornness or resistance. What they called boring or unremarkable was actually the blueprint for true growth and lasting change, while they chased shiny upgrades that eventually lose their sparkle. They walked away from the solid ground beneath their feet. They wanted a quick fix, an easy high, something that distracted them from the real work. But in the process, they threw away what could have elevated their entire life, your steady presence, your wisdom, your authenticity. You weren't here to dazzle with empty promises or superficial thrills. You were here to build something real. They didn't see that because they were blinded by the temptation of illusions. What they failed to grasp is that true elevation doesn't come from adding more. It comes from honoring the design, the blueprint, the original integrity that holds everything together. They fumbled a rare kind of foundation, mistaking it for just another piece in their puzzle. And now, having lost the blueprint, they're stuck trying to rebuild with scattered pieces, never realizing the masterpiece they once had was you. Number 12. They thought their rejection would break you, not realizing it was the final unlock. They believed that pushing you away, closing their doors, and turning their backs would shatter you into pieces. They thought their rejection would silence your voice, crush your spirit, and keep you stuck in the same place. What they didn't understand was that their cold shoulder wasn't the end, it was the spark. Their dismissal was like cutting the last chain that held you back. It wasn't a loss for you. It was freedom. The very thing they tried to use as a weapon became your launch pad. Without their approval, without their presence, you found a space to breathe, to grow, and to finally hear your own truth without interference. They fumbled the moment you needed them the most, not because you depended on them, but because their absence was exactly what your soul was screaming for. It was the push that cracked open doors you didn't even know were locked. Their rejection didn't break you, it unlocked you. It's ironic how the people who try to diminish you often become the unwitting catalysts of your breakthrough. Their refusal to hold you close, to support you, or to believe in you was the final ingredient your destiny needed to unfold. You didn't fall apart when they walked away. You came together in ways they never imagined. You discovered strength in solitude, power in silence, and clarity in the space they abandoned. So while they thought they were dealing a fatal blow, they actually handed you the key to your next level. They fumbled, not just you, but their chance to witness your rise. And now, they're left watching from the sidelines as you claim the freedom they never saw coming. Number 13, they saw you as a threat, not a blessing, because the light in you exposed the shadows in them. They didn't fear you because you threatened their ego or power. They feared you because your light peeled back the layers they desperately wanted to keep hidden. It wasn't about you pointing fingers or calling them out. It was their own reflection staring back, unfiltered and raw, that unsettled them. Your presence was a mirror they refused to look into. You carried a kind of energy that didn't play by their rules. It was authentic, unshakable, and unwavering, and that exposed the cracks in their carefully built facades. Your clarity didn't shame them. It simply illuminated the parts of themselves they were too afraid to face. The insecurities, the lies, the compromises, they couldn't hide from those when you were around. So rather than confronting their own shadows, they chose to fumble you, to push you away, to silence the light that made them uncomfortable. They weren't rejecting you. They were rejecting the truth you represented. They wanted to preserve the comfortable illusions that kept them stuck, even if it meant losing the blessing that could have helped them grow. They mistook their fear for control, thinking that by dimming your light or cutting you off, they could protect themselves from change. But in doing so, they only trapped themselves deeper in the darkness they feared. They fumbled the one person who wasn't there to expose their faults with cruelty, but with a purity that demanded honesty. First from themselves, then from the world. Their loss isn't just yours, it's theirs. Because while you continue to shine and rise, they remain imprisoned by shadows, unable or unwilling to step into the light you so effortlessly carry. Number 14. They fumbled you because they were spiritually bankrupt and you were their last loan. They treated your soul like an ATM, always withdrawing but never depositing. They took your energy, your wisdom, your emotional labor without a second thought, as if your spirit had an endless balance. You gave and gave, fueling their battles, soothing their fears, and lighting their way when their own spark had long burned out. You were their emotional lender, the backup generator when their own power failed. You carried their weight, absorbed their pain, and offered clarity when confusion ruled their minds. But they never once stopped to refill your tank. They never asked if you were okay or thanked you for holding space. Instead, they assumed your supply was infinite, and that assumption was their fatal mistake. Because every account has limits, and every soul needs care. You kept giving until the universe finally stepped in and said, "Enough." It wasn't bitterness or revenge. It was balance being restored. The moment they refused to replenish your spirit, the universe closed their account. Their emotional overdraft came with consequences they never saw coming. Now, while they're left drained, empty, and desperate, you're entering a phase of divine surplus, overflowing with energy, wisdom, and peace that can't be borrowed or stolen. You're thriving in a currency they never valued, moving forward without the debt they left behind. They fumbled the one who held the last loan, the one who could have been their greatest asset if only they'd understood the value of reciprocity. Now, they're bankrupt in every sense. while you build wealth in a spiritual economy they'll never comprehend. They made the biggest mistake of their lives when they fumbled you. Because what they failed to realize is that you were never just a person to be underestimated or discarded. You were a force of nature, a reservoir of untapped power and divine design. Every misstep they took against you only tightened the threads of your purpose and strengthened the armor around your soul. They thought they were dealing with someone fragile, replaceable, or broken, but they were facing a spirit forged in the fires of trials they couldn't even begin to understand. Their ignorance cost them more than just a relationship or a connection. They lost the rare chance to grow alongside someone who held cosmic authority and sacred wisdom. They gambled away the blueprint that could have elevated their entire existence, mistaking your steadfastness for complacency and your silence for weakness. But while they scrambled to hold on to illusions, you were quietly unlocking the next level of your destiny, fueled by a strength that transcends the ordinary. The truth is, what they saw as your downfall was your final liberation. Their rejection wasn't a closing door. It was the opening of a vast new horizon where you stepped into your full power without their interference. They wanted you to stay broken to soothe their own guilt, but you healed on your own terms, becoming a living testament to resilience and grace. And now, while they drown in the consequences of their spiritual bankruptcy, emotional overdraft, and misguided fear, you rise in divine surplus, whole, untouchable, and unstoppable. They fumbled a soul too rare to replace, too radiant to dim, and too destined to be stopped. So let this be a warning to anyone who ever underestimates the chosen ones. Mishandle us, and you don't just lose a person, you trigger a cosmic reckoning. You set forces in motion that don't forget, don't forgive easily, and don't allow the fallen to walk away unscathed. You were never their backup plan, their temporary fix, or their safety net. You were, and always will be, the blueprint of something greater, and the universe itself is watching, ready to tip the scales and rewrite the story in your favor. They fumbled you, yes, but in that fumble they ignited your rise. And that rise? It's the beginning of a legacy they'll never live down. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community of awakened souls. Like this video to show your support. Drop a comment below to share your own experiences or thoughts. I want to hear your story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this truth today, please share it with them. Together, we rise stronger, wiser, and more unstoppable. Stay tuned, because the journey is just getting started. God bless you. Bless